Hello my friends, welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. If you're new here, special welcome to you. I'm Lindy. I do read a lot, pretty much a book a day. So today I have got 7 books to tell you about that I finished in the last week. But 5 of these are children's books, so they don't take so long to read. This is important to me right now because I'm in the middle of a big move. I'm leaving Edmonton and moving to Victoria next month, and there's other things going on as well. On Monday, I'm going to be flying to Stratford, Ontario to see a bunch of plays at the theatre festival there. I'll tell you more about that in another video, because today is all about books, and I've got my little buddy Joni here as we sit out in the garden. It's starting to be fall. There's yellow leaves on the ground already. Yeah, time moves on. I'm grateful to those of you who commented on a previous video when I showed some of the textiles that I made when I was in Whitehorse for a workshop on the Katazome technique, and that's kindly asked me if I could show more. And so at the very end of this video there will be more images of those indigo dyed cloths that I made. And also you might like to know that I do include timestamps. So if there are books or types of books that you're not interested in, you can use the timestamps to navigate to the next portion of the video. All right, on to the first book, which is actually an audiobook called Wasteland. It's by Oliver Franklin-Wallis, a British journalist, and it's everything to do about trash, and it is fascinating. It's if you like popular interest nonfiction about issues that we are facing today, I highly recommend this. I'll read you just a few passages that I transcribed from the audiobook. So much in here struck me, not just about the things that we throw away, and this is at top of my mind because behind me there's a dumpster. After 37 years in the same house, there are broken and shabby things that aren't suitable for donating to charity. A dumpster is a wonderful solution. But all of this stuff, I know, is going into the landfill. And all of us in the richer countries are generating so much trash. According to Franklin-Wallis, 1/3 of what we throw away is something produced the same year. And between 1960 and 2010, the amount of waste the average American was creating every year tripled. The modern economy is built on trash. In 2016, the United States alone was sending 1,500 shipping containers every single day full of waste to China. Between 1988 and 2018, nearly half, that's 47%, of all plastic waste exported worldwide was sent to China for recycling. And then in 2018, China shut its doors and recycling companies all around the world collapsed. There's really good information here about recycling and what works and what doesn't. One of the things that really struck me is the information in here about bioplastics. Most people that Franklin-Wallis spoke to in the waste industry hate compostable plastics, and he explains why. It has become common practice for compost facilities to screen out bioplastics and to burn them instead. He writes, today, co-opted by greenwashing and corporate interests, the term has come to represent a kind of mythic solution to the plastic crisis. Bioplastics are loosely defined as plastics made from organic matter, and they come in several forms. So all of that is explained in this book. I found it fascinating. He talks about sewers in a really engaging way. He talks about food waste. Can you guess what food it is that we waste the most? It's bread. In the UK alone, more than 900,000 tons of bread is wasted every year, or 20 million slices of bread every day. 44% of all white sliced bread in the UK is never eaten. In the USA, 1/3 of all bread is wasted. Think of that the next time you ask for your crust to be cut off. Most of that waste happens at home because we buy loaves that are too big, and so they go stale or moldy before we get a chance to finish them. And then there's all the waste that happens at the agricultural level. There was a recent study that found that 1/3 of all crops in California are wasted at harvest. The World Wildlife Fund estimates that 1.2 billion tons of food, or 15% of all food produced worldwide, is wasted before it even gets to the store. Oh, here's another thing. Cotton tote bags must be used 7,100 times before they are more environmentally friendly than using the single-use plastic bags they replace. This is according to a 2018 study that was done in Denmark. For organic cotton, you'd need to use the bag 20,000 times, or once a day for 54 years. And how many of those bags will last that long? How much forest is being chopped down to grow the cotton? And yet, it sometimes feels that totes are now being given out as freely as plastic. Not to say that plastic bags are better. There's just so many complex issues that have to do with our consumption and waste. It's fascinating, fascinating book. Next up is another audiobook, Indian No More, and it's by the Umpqua writer Charlene McManis, who died in 2018. So this novel was completed, or the final editing was done by another Indigenous author, a Cherokee woman, Traci Sorell. I will link below to an interview with Traci talking about working with the original author and her whole experience with this book. And there's also a list of the many accolades it got. I will just mention one of them, which was that it was awarded the American Indian Library Association Youth Literature Award in 2020. This is based on the author's own experience. The tribe that she belongs to and the Grand Ronde Reservation was terminated by the U.S. government, declared they weren't Indians anymore. In the late spring of 1957, Daddy signed us up for the federal government's Indian relocation program. The government promised Indians a better home, furniture, schooling, and a good job. Daddy called it an opportunity and seemed to believe it. Cheech called it an eviction. The termination law said we could buy our own land if we wanted to stay, but we couldn't afford it. Almost no Grand Ronder could. The government marked up the land prices 2 to 3 times what the lots would normally sell for. Everyone on the res said no one should pay that much, even if they could. Some families who could afford it put their money together to buy their allotments or bought cheaper land close by. This wasn't an option for us. But we held on as long as we could before we were forced to move. And they end up moving to Los Angeles. So it's told from the viewpoint of a little girl who makes friends in their new location, but their friends have such a misconception of what being an Indian is, and they base that on what they see on television, right? There's a passage in the book that reminded me of my own childhood. My dad was like this. So here's the conversation at Thanksgiving, which incidentally is the first time that this family has ever celebrated Thanksgiving. "John, you give grace," Mama said. "All righty," Daddy said, putting down his fork. "We give thanks for good food, good meat, good God, let's eat." "John!" And I can just hear my mom saying, "Bert," after he did the same thing, saying the very same lines for grace. The story's really well told. It's suitable for its middle grade audience, but also I recommend it to any adults who are interested in this topic. It's very well done. And next up is another Indigenous story, Ami Osâwâpikones, which translates as Dear Dandelion. So there are some words in Cree language in this book by S.J. Okemow, who is a medical illustrator, and she grew up in Alberta, now lives in Toronto. This is her first picture book, or first book of any kind, I think, and it celebrates dandelions. I'm a person who loves dandelions. The message in this book is how we are more than one thing at the same time. It's truly delightful, with these soft color illustrations, and we go through all the seasons looking at dandelions. Next up, another picture book, Everything in Its Place. The text is by Pauline David-Sax, and the illustrations are by Charnelle, Pinkney, Barlow. This is a story of books and belonging, and you people love books, and I think you will be able to identify with this. When I finished reading it, I went like this, and I let the emotions sink in. It's the message that it's okay to be different is absolutely heartwarming, and I also really liked the queer sensibility in here. I didn't put a little rainbow flag in my description box below for this book because the queerness is so subtle. The poet who's mentioned in here is a lesbian one, Mary Oliver, and the woman that the child Nikki truly admires and looks up to is Maggie, who looks pretty butch, rides a motorcycle, comes into Nikki's mom's cafe with a whole bunch of other butch-looking women, and yeah, I'd say there's a lot of queerness in here. And almost all of the characters are either black or brown, I would say, even though Pinkney Barlow's artwork, in its collage style, leaves the background color of the page. It's pure delight. Next up is another middle grade novel, Elf Dog and Owlhead. It's by M.T. Anderson. This is a fantasy that's set in New England, where M.T. Anderson lives, and it takes place during a worldwide pandemic. Family is cooped up at home, but fortunately they live next to a forest where our central character goes off exploring a lot. So we see family dynamics. His older sister is 14, that's Traci, and I really love her character arc in here. Also, we have Clay, who in the woods meets a dog of the fairy world who has gotten separated from the people who live under the earth, and those fairy are scary beings. Adventure ensues. There are gorgeous illustrations by Junyi Wu, graphite illustrations. And here is a line that made me laugh out loud. That is Death on his pale horse, Trigger Mortis. Lots of fun. Next up is Anne of Green Gables, a graphic novel, and it was adapted from LM Montgomery's classic by Maria Marsden, and the artwork is by Brenna Thummler. I picked this up for Jolene of Bookworm Adventure Girls Read Across Canada project. I love the book Anne of Green Gables, and I was really curious to see how this would be adapted. It's beautifully done, and the text is so spare. It's mostly told through illustrations. So I'll show you some of those images here. If you don't know the story, it's an orphan girl who goes to live with an elderly brother and sister. They were expecting a boy to help out on the farm, and it turns out to be Anne, who is full of imagination and spunk and drama, and all of that is captured really well in this adaptation. There are some memorable scenes, like how much she wanted to dress with puffed sleeves, and the time that she put liniment into the cake instead of vanilla, and the time that she got her friend Diana drunk accidentally. This was a great way to revisit that classic. Okay, last up. This is an adult novel, Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein. This has been longlisted for the Booker Prize and longlisted for Canada's Scotiabank Gillard Prize. Bob the Booker recently reviewed this in a standalone review, so I will link it down below. If you don't know Bob, you can probably guess from his channel name that he reads Booker books, and he has recently completed the entire long list. So congratulations, Bob. I agree with Bob that the mysteriousness of this novel is one of its strengths. It's quite fable-like, even though it also seems to be set in contemporary times, because there's a mobile phone is mentioned. It's the story of the youngest in a large family who has gone to live with the eldest in this family, her eldest brother, to help him out when his wife and children leave him. And in this unnamed country that she moves to, she's very much an outsider. And a lot of what's happening is puzzling and unsettling. There's an atmosphere of dread and foreboding. We're very much inside her outsider experience and her experience with anti-Semitism. And in many ways, there were aspects of this book that kind of reminded me of other books that I have read, including Everyone Knows Your Mother is a Witch by Rivka Galchen and Harvest by Jim Crace. Now, both of those are historical fiction, and as I said, this one is contemporary, but it has that feel, that sort of timeless, fable-like feel. And the other writers that I thought of that their writing kind of reminded me of are Eva Baltasar and Jenny Erpenbeck and Otessa Moshfegh too. So if you're a person who's really into language and how it's used, I think this is a book for you, but it's probably not a book for everyone. I'm going to read you a passage or two to give you a bit of a taste. This is right near the beginning, where the narrator's brother talks about the breakup of his family. And the children, my brother said, they too had always taken the part of their mother. He could see that now. From birth, if not before, they had sworn him off, found him ridiculous or else pathetic, a poor father and a sorry excuse for a man. If he was being honest, he had, he said, long felt these things about himself, and observing that his wife and children felt alike and expressed these feelings with such vehemence and at times he had to admit eloquence, for they were, after all, a family of readers, he was almost comforted. Although it would perhaps come as a surprise to me, he said with a sidelong glance, since he had been the eldest child, the most treasured, he had suffered. Yes, from childhood onwards, through the teenage years, into adulthood, and to this very day, he suffered. And although his suffering had never been suspected by friends or relatives, nor even, for the most part, by himself, he said, running one hand through his thick, wavy hair, still, he knew he had suffered. It was his truth, and he had to speak it at whatever cost. I found the humor in here very subtle and pointed. And in that passage, you also see a little bit of the theme of what it does to a person when people around you dislike or distrust you. One more passage. My presence simplified things, since all the tasks previously divided between my brother's wife and children would be my responsibility alone. The cleaning, the cooking, the shopping, the laundering, the airing out, the closing down, the warming up, the cooling off, the chopping of wood, the cutting of grass, the uprooting of weeds, and many other things besides. My brother dealt with the payment of bills and invoices. Such free time as I had, for example, on weekend afternoons, for my brother was not an unreasonable man, or on weeknights after he had retired to his bedroom, I spent roaming the surrounding countryside. I was thoroughly absorbed in this novel about a young woman living in a place where everyone is either suspicious of her or downright antagonistic, and I just kept turning the pages to the end. Speaking of ends, that's all I've got for you today. Thank you so very much for watching. I really appreciate hearing from you in the comments, so do say hello even if you don't have anything else to say. Do let me know if you've read any of these books or if you plan to read them. Anything else you want to say, I'm happy to hear about it. Stick around if you want to see more of the stencil resist indigo dyed textiles that I made. at a recent workshop. Thanks so much for watching. Bye for now.